Some moments sneak up on you when you least expect them. When your head is down, your mind is elsewhere, and your plans are laid out like a roadmap you think you understand. That morning, I was just another rideshare driver clocking in for another long shift in Seattle, rain streaking down the windshield, the scent of too many cheap coffees soaked into the car's fabric, and a to-do list waiting at home I was half dreading. I didn't expect anything special from the ride request that popped up on my phone. Airport pickup, downtown, female passenger, drop-off, SeaTac. That was all it said. Standard, routine, forgettable. Except it wasn't. It was the beginning of something I never saw coming. A story that changed not just my day, but my life. Because what started as a quick ride to the airport turned into the most meaningful connection I'd ever experienced. Her name was Sierra, and from the moment she stepped into my back seat with that rushed breath, oversized luggage, and a complicated look in her eyes, something shifted. Not dramatically, not like lightning or thunder, but subtly. Like the way light changes before a storm, or the way silence feels different just before someone says something they can't take back. At the time, I didn't know she was running. I didn't know she was leaving something behind. I just knew I didn't want her to go. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day had started like any other. My name's Caleb, 32, divorced, trying to put my life back together one ride at a time. I'd started driving full-time after leaving a job in logistics that had drained the color from my days and the sleep from my nights. I wasn't proud of where I was, but I wasn't ashamed either. Just floating somewhere in between. That morning, I dropped off a tech consultant at Amazon's South Lake Union offices, then a college student heading back to campus. Small talk, weather chatter, some awkward silences. I was about to grab a coffee when Sierra's request came in. I almost skipped it. I was tired. It was out of the way. But something nudged me to accept. I pulled up to the address, one of those boutique apartment buildings downtown, that scream curated lifestyle and custom espresso machines in the lobby. She was already outside, standing under the awning with a burgundy suitcase and a navy peacoat pulled tight around her shoulders. Her hair was wet at the ends, rain curling into it, and her phone was pressed to her ear. But she wasn't saying anything. Just nodding, staring off into the street like the world behind her was burning, and the only thing she could do was walk away. She slid into the back seat without a word, and gave me a quick glance through the rearview mirror. Her eyes were hazel, but not soft. They were sharp and restless, scanning, calculating. She told me her flight was in 2 hours and that she needed to get to SeaTac as fast as possible. I nodded, put the car in drive, and we joined the stream of traffic heading southbound on I-5. For the first few minutes, neither of us said anything. I played some quiet jazz through the stereo, something mellow to balance the tension she brought in with her, and just focused on the road. But I kept watching her in the mirror. She wasn't scrolling her phone or checking emails like most business types. She was just holding it in her lap, turning it over in her hand like she couldn't decide what to do with it. I saw her wipe a tear when she thought I wasn't looking, just one, quick, controlled, like she had trained herself not to fall apart in front of strangers. I wanted to say something, ask if she was okay, but I've learned people don't always want you to ask. Sometimes they just want a quiet space to breathe. Eventually, she broke the silence herself. "Do you like driving?" Her voice was low, but calm. "Some days," I replied. "Others, I just like having a reason to be out of the house." She nodded, then leaned her head against the window. "Must be nice to be going somewhere but not having to leave anything behind." That sentence stuck with me, mostly because I didn't understand it until much later. At the time, it felt like a riddle. We kept driving. The rain was steady but light, the kind of drizzle Seattle wears like a second skin. Traffic was mercifully light, and I made decent time. But with every mile, I felt a growing resistance in my chest, like the road wasn't taking her to the airport but taking something away from me. She didn't talk much, but I felt her presence more than I'd ever felt anyone's in that car. There was something about her silence that demanded attention. And then, just as we passed the Boeing Field exit, she asked, "Do you believe in signs?" I glanced at her through the mirror. Like fate? She shrugged. Or maybe just things that aren't coincidences. I didn't know what to say. I'm not the mystical type. I believe in effort, in staying afloat, in showing up. But I also know there are moments you can't explain, like picking up someone who makes your chest ache before you even know their name. She told me she was flying to Chicago. Not by choice, she said, but it's what makes sense. Her mother had fallen sick. Her job had ended. Her lease was up. It felt like the universe had pushed her out the door, and now she was walking through it, even if every part of her wanted to stay. When she said, "I don't think I'm ready to go," I wanted to pull over and tell her not to. But who was I? Just a stranger in a gray hoodie and a Corolla with a missing hubcap. So instead, I said the only thing that felt true. "Then maybe you shouldn't." She looked up, surprised. Her eyes met mine in the mirror. "Would it be crazy if I didn't?" she whispered. I didn't answer, not because I didn't have one, but because I already knew this story wasn't going to end the way either of us expected. I didn't pull over. I didn't turn around or make a grand gesture. I just kept driving because, in that moment, I didn't know what else to do. The car became a quiet vessel, drifting along a stretch of freeway suspended in tension neither of us knew how to name. Sierra fell silent again, eyes trained on the rain sliding sideways across the window, and I stayed focused on the road even though my mind was tangled in everything she'd said. Something about the way she asked, "Would it be crazy if I didn't go?" hadn't sounded rhetorical. It sounded like a door cracking open. A question that had an answer waiting to be heard if only someone had the courage to say it aloud. I glanced at the time. We still had 25 minutes until her terminal. I didn't know if she was going to get on that plane or not, but I knew one thing. I didn't want to be the one to close that door for her. I wanted her to decide. I wanted her to stay. And for the first time in a long time, that desire didn't come from loneliness or convenience. It came from something deeper, something that felt like truth. We passed the Tukwila exit and Sierra sat up straighter, rubbing her hands over her thighs like she was waking from a fog. "I have this list," she said suddenly. "Things I was supposed to do before I turned 35. Her voice was steady, almost clinical. Move to the East Coast, start my own company, fall in love with someone who didn't scare me. And yet, I'm 34 and a half. My startup imploded last spring. My last relationship ended in court. And now I'm flying back to a mother who only calls when she's sick or needs something." She paused. I was going to check that last box with someone who made sense, not someone who made me feel. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She wasn't really talking to me anyway. She was talking to the version of herself that had been buried under to-do lists and duty for too long. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then she turned her head toward me, her expression soft but fierce. "You ever do something completely irrational just because your gut told you it was the only sane thing left?" I didn't even have to think. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice low. "Once. I quit a job I spent 6 years building a reputation in because I couldn't take another Monday wondering why my chest felt like a cage." She nodded like she understood that exactly. "And did it work out?" she asked. I thought, for a second. "Not at first. I lost a lot. But eventually, yeah. It gave me space to find something better." She didn't respond, but I could feel something shift again. Like she was measuring her own fear against mine. Like she was searching for a reason to give herself permission. As we exited onto the loop toward SeaTac, I realized we were almost out of road. The parking signs came into view, departures ahead. Her time was almost up. I slowed as we neared the terminal and looked at her through the mirror. "What gate?" I asked. She bit her bottom lip, her hand hovering over the phone in her lap. "B," she started to say, then stopped. "Actually, can we just pull over for a second?" I nodded and veered into the nearest short-term lot, pulling into a spot near the corner where fewer cars passed. We sat there, the engine idling, the rain softening into a mist. Sierra turned to face me fully now, her seatbelt still fastened but her posture all wrong for someone planning to leave. Do you think this is just me being scared to go back to a place that never really felt like home? She asked. Or is it possible that there's something here I'm not supposed to walk away from? I didn't answer with logic or reason or a poetic speech. I just said, if you're asking, you already know. Her breath caught in her throat. Like those words cracked something open she'd been trying to hold together with pride and habit. She blinked away whatever emotion swelled in her and reached into her purse for her phone. A moment later, she made a call. I heard a voice on the other end, muffled, distant. But Sierra kept her eyes on me the entire time. Yeah, it's me, she said. Listen, I'm not coming today. Something came up. No, I'm safe. I just need time to figure things out. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I'll call tomorrow. And then she hung up. She let out a slow breath, like she'd been holding it for miles. That was my sister, she said. She's the one taking care of Mom. She'll be mad for a while, but I needed this. I still hadn't moved. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, my heart thudding loud enough I was sure she could hear it. So what now? I asked carefully. She looked out the window at the blinking lights of the terminal, then back at me. Now? I think you drive me somewhere I can get pancakes and coffee and maybe talk without feeling like I'm ruining someone's schedule. I smiled without meaning to. I know a place, I said. We pulled out of the lot, not in a rush, not following any map. The weight in the car had lifted. The rain had slowed. And somewhere between the airport exit and the diner on Beacon Hill, the silence between us started to feel less like a question and more like the beginning of something neither of us needed to explain just yet. The diner wasn't fancy, and that was part of its charm. One of those roadside places that smelled like syrup and coffee no matter the time of day, where the booths had cracked leather seats and the waitress called you hun, even if she'd never seen you before. I took Sierra there because I didn't want to impress her. I wanted her to breathe, to sit somewhere without expectations and maybe just exist, even for a little while. We found a booth near the back where the windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. She shrugged off her coat and slid into the seat across from me, and I could already see something different in the way she moved. Less tension in her shoulders, less calculation behind her eyes. She looked like a woman slowly thawing from a winter she hadn't realized she was living in. The waitress came by, poured us 2 coffees without asking, and left menus we barely opened. Sierra ordered blueberry pancakes and a side of eggs, and I just mirrored her order because somehow it felt right to not overthink it. As the minutes passed and the plates came, the conversation eased into something unforced. We talked about trivial things at first. The weather, our favorite breakfasts, how both of us hated traffic, but secretly liked the city noise at night. She asked if I'd always been a driver, and I told her about how I'd once studied architecture, spent 3 years in college before life rerouted me into a full-time job behind the wheel. I didn't go into the details, didn't tell her about the medical bills, the unexpected responsibilities, or how dreams sometimes fade when you're too busy surviving. And she didn't press. That's what struck me about Sierra. She wasn't just good at talking. She was excellent at listening. Like every word mattered, even if it was nothing special. In return, she told me about her work in tech startups. How the adrenaline used to excite her until it didn't. How she built things people used but never saw the faces of the people she helped. That disconnection had eaten at her slowly. She said, like a leak under the surface of a perfect house. You don't notice it until the floorboards buckle. We lingered longer than most. The diner emptied and filled again while our cups were refilled over and over. Sierra laughed at something I said. I don't even remember what. And in that laugh was a glimpse of the girl she must have been before the world hardened her. It hit me hard. How much we protect ourselves from joy because we're too busy, guarding against disappointment. And it made me wonder, how many times had she come close to this kind of calm, this kind of warmth, only to pull back before it could get real. Her phone buzzed once on the table, and she didn't even glance at it. Just tapped it face down and went back to sipping her coffee. That simple act told me more than any monologue ever could. Eventually, the waitress dropped the check with a wink, and I reached for it automatically. Sierra protested. Of course. Said she wasn't one of those women who expected men to pay. But I told her it wasn't about the money. It was about wanting to give her something, even if it was just breakfast, and a place to land for a while. She let me, finally, but not before sliding a $5 bill under her mug for a tip. "For the refills," she said, and I noticed her handwriting on the receipt. Small, neat, and oddly elegant. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, the kind of day where time feels like it's running slower than usual. I asked if she had anywhere. She needed to be, and she shook her head. "I canceled my flight, remember?" she said with a half smile. "For now, I'm free." And I could tell she didn't mean in the logistical sense. She meant it in the emotional one. We walked the sidewalk outside the diner with no clear direction. Just moving. Just letting our feet take us somewhere that wasn't goodbye. I pointed out a bookstore I liked, and she said she hadn't read a novel in months because her brain was always fried from work. So we went in. She wandered the aisles while I thumbed through a shelf of used mysteries, and when I turned to find her, she was standing in the kids section, running her fingers over the cover of a storybook, like it held memories instead of just pages. I asked her if she had kids, and she said no. "But I always thought I'd have one by now," she added. There was no sadness in her voice, just a kind of quiet honesty that I appreciated more than I could say. "Still might," I offered, and she looked at me, surprised. Not at the sentiment, but that I hadn't asked her to explain or justify it. The rest of the day passed in fragments, stitched together by moments that didn't need labels. We grabbed ice cream from a food truck, even though it was too cold for it. We sat in a park watching pigeons swarm old men with breadcrumbs. We talked about regrets in a way that felt like promises. And as the sun dipped low behind the buildings, casting the city in gold, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. I didn't want her to leave, not just tonight, not ever. But I knew wanting wasn't enough. People like Sierra had reasons to run, and I had nothing to offer except a heart that was suddenly fuller than it had any right to be. When I finally drove her back to her hotel to collect her bag, the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, sure, but not uncomfortable. Like two people standing at the edge of something real and raw, and wondering if they were brave enough to jump. I parked by the curb, hands on the wheel, and she turned to face me. That same unsure look she wore when she first stepped into my car that morning. "This wasn't the plan," she said softly. "Not even close." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. "But maybe that's okay," she added. "Maybe some plans are meant to be broken so better ones can show up." She leaned over then, gently, cautiously, and kissed me on the cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she stepped out, walking slowly toward the building like she was giving me one last chance to call her back. I didn't. Not yet. I just watched. Because sometimes you have to give someone the space to choose you, not out of fear or confusion, but out of clarity. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of anything dramatic. Not because I was tortured with confusion or aching with longing like some paperback character caught in a love triangle. No, it was quieter than that. More subtle. I just couldn't stop thinking about the way she looked walking away, like she wasn't entirely convinced she should be leaving, like part of her wanted me to call out and change her mind. But I hadn't. And maybe that was the right thing. Maybe space was exactly what she needed to process whatever just happened between us, which, to be fair, was still undefined. I lay in bed with one arm behind my head and stared at the ceiling, letting the rhythm of the city at night hum through my cracked window. Horns, wind, a dog barking 2 blocks over. I knew this soundtrack by heart. But for the first time in years, it didn't comfort me. It made me restless. Like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. Morning came too quickly, but I was already up. I showered, got dressed, and made a cup of coffee I didn't touch. I kept checking my phone. Not for a message exactly, but for something. A missed call, a social media ping, a cosmic sign maybe. I don't know. Nothing came. Eventually, I gave up pacing and went out, deciding to clear my head the only way I knew how, behind the wheel. The city was already stretching its limbs. By the time I got downtown, The sidewalks filling with suits and sneakers, street vendors opening carts that smelled like sausage and burnt onions. I started driving aimlessly, letting instinct pick the streets. It wasn't about direction. It was about distraction. But no matter where I went, every woman I passed with a sleek coat or dark hair made me look twice, hoping for her. And every time it wasn't, it stung. By noon, I'd circled back near the hotel. I told myself it was coincidence, that I was just in the area, but I knew better. I parked across the street, turned off the engine, and sat there like an idiot watching the glass doors like it was a movie. She didn't come out. People did. Travelers dragging suitcases, bellhops with carts, but not her. I started wondering if she'd checked out already, if I'd missed my chance completely. And just when I was about to give up and pull away, there she was, Sierra, in a beige trench coat, sunglasses, and a tote bag slung over one shoulder. She didn't have a suitcase. She didn't look rushed. She looked unsure, like someone who had a destination but wasn't sure she wanted to get there. I don't know what got into me, but I got out of the car and crossed the street before I could talk myself out of it. "Hey," I said, and she turned, startled for just a second before recognition softened her expression. "Hey," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I was just—" She gestured vaguely toward the corner, then let her hand fall. "Walking." "No bags," I pointed. "Out. Decided to travel light?" She gave a small smile. "I never rebooked the flight." That hung between us like an open door. I didn't ask why. I just nodded, and she seemed to appreciate that. "I thought about it all night," she continued. "About what it would mean to leave. About how easy it is to disappear when no one's expecting you to stay." We started walking together without saying where we were going. Just side by side, turning corners as they came. "You ever feel like your life isn't yours?" she asked after a while. "Like you built something that looks great from the outside, but every day you wake up inside it and wonder how the hell you ended up there?" I nodded. "Yeah, more than I'd like to admit." She glanced at me. "That's what my job became. What my life became. Appointments, meetings, flights. None of it was mine. It was all for something else, someone else, my parents' expectations, my investors, my ex. So canceling the flight," I began, "was the first thing I've done just for me in years," she finished. We stopped at a small bench near a fountain. It wasn't much, just chipped stone and pigeons. But it was quiet enough to feel private. She sat, and I followed. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then, quietly, she said, "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what comes next." "That makes two of us," I replied. "But maybe that's okay." She looked at me then, really looked, like she was trying to read something in my face she hadn't noticed before. "You're easy to be around," she said. "That sounds simple, but it's not. I don't have to perform with you." I smiled, a little self-conscious. "I think that's the nicest thing anyone's said to me all year." She laughed, and it was genuine, not polished or practiced, just real. After a while, I asked her if she was hungry, and she said yes. So we ended up back at the diner. The same booth, the same waitress. This time Sierra ordered French toast, and I went with waffles. It felt like a small tradition forming. One of those things that isn't official but means more because of that. We talked less this time, but it wasn't awkward. Just comfortable. Like we didn't need to fill the air to feel close. She played, with her napkin while I paid the bill. And when we stepped outside, the sun had finally broken through the gray, casting the sidewalk in light that made the world look new again. As we walked back toward where I'd parked, she slowed. "I should probably figure out where I'm going to stay," she said. "The hotel's nice, but—" I interrupted before I could think better of it. "You could stay with me." Her eyes widened just slightly. "I mean, just the couch. I have a pullout. I wasn't trying to—" She placed a hand gently on my arm. "I know," she said softly. "And thank you. But let me take a walk first. Just to think." I nodded, heart thudding louder than it should. "Of course. Take your time." She smiled, turned, and started walking slowly down the block, her silhouette framed by sunlight and uncertainty. I watched until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. Then I got in my car and sat in silence. I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, I felt okay, not knowing, because some stories didn't need outlines. Some stories just needed someone brave enough to turn the page. Sierra didn't call that night, and I didn't expect her to. What we shared over coffee and that walk wasn't something that needed to be immediately chased down or defined. It lingered, in the space between us, like the quiet after a perfect song. The kind you don't want to talk over because it might break the spell. Still, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about her. Not just in passing either. It was the kind of thinking that crept in while I brushed my teeth or while I watched the news and realized I hadn't really heard a single word. I tried to tell myself it was just curiosity, that the connection was fleeting, that she'd already moved on and I should too. But there was something different about her. Something that had already rooted itself deep in my thoughts, whether I invited it or not. The next morning, I went about my day as usual, or at least I pretended to. I took a couple fares, picked up a regular from the pharmacy, dropped off a delivery to the bakery on 3rd, but it all felt mechanical. The city pulsed around me like it always did, but it was as if I was observing it from behind glass. People laughed, rushed, cursed, bought coffee, took calls, and all I could do was drift through it like I didn't quite belong there anymore. Eventually, I pulled into a parking spot near the park, the one with the iron benches and the willow trees, and just sat with the engine off. I didn't even realize I was hoping she might show up until I started scanning faces, one after the other, looking for that familiar stride or flash of auburn hair. I was about to give up and start the car when a message buzzed through on my phone. Unknown number. Just one line. "Can I buy you that coffee this time?" My chest tightened. Not with nerves, but with something gentler, something that felt like the beginning of warmth after a long winter. I typed back, "Tell me where and I'll be there." She replied with an address. A small bookstore cafe tucked between a florist and a laundromat on the east side. A place I hadn't been to in years. It wasn't flashy. Not the kind of place a woman like her would typically choose. Which made me want to see her all the more. I got there early, which wasn't like me. I found a table in the back, near the window, and tried to look casual. The girl behind the counter gave me a knowing smile like she'd seen this kind of waiting before. I ordered a black coffee and pretended to read a newspaper someone left behind. But my eyes kept drifting to the door. When Sierra walked in, she wasn't dressed like the poised businesswoman from before. She wore jeans, a soft white sweater, and her hair tied back in a loose knot. No makeup, no heels. Just her, and damn if that didn't make her even more beautiful. She spotted me instantly, smiled like we'd known each other for years, and crossed the room. "You're early," she teased. "You're late," I lied. She laughed, settled into the chair across from me, and the silence between us felt like comfort instead of awkwardness. We talked for hours, about nothing really. Favorite books, childhood injuries. That time she tried to dye her hair blue in college and ended up looking like a Smurf. That time I broke my ankle skateboarding off a picnic table because I thought it would impress a girl. Stories poured out of us like we'd been storing them for each other. And slowly, the barriers fell. Somewhere around her second cappuccino, her expression shifted. She looked down, finger tracing the edge of her cup. "I'm not used to this," she said softly. "What?" I asked. "Feeling seen," she replied. "Not managed, not judged, just seen." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Because honestly, I felt the same. We left the cafe together and walked without a plan. The city had that late afternoon glow where the sun kisses everything gold before slipping behind the buildings. She slipped her arm through mine and I didn't question it. It felt right. Natural. As we reached the corner near her hotel, she slowed. "I have to ask," she said. "Do you think this is crazy, us? This, whatever it is?" I thought for a second, then answered, "Maybe, but the best things usually are." She smiled, not just with her lips, but with her whole face. "I think I'm tired of safe," she whispered. "Tired of always being the one who makes the rational choice." "Then don't be," I said. "Just for today." She nodded, and that was that. We ended up back at my place, not for anything wild, just takeout and music. She curled up on the couch, shoes off, and I sat next to her with a slice of pizza balanced on a napkin. We didn't need a fancy setting or expensive wine. It was simple. It was real. She told me about her daughter, a college freshman on the other side of the country, about the divorce, about the career that had once thrilled her but now just paid the bills. I listened, and when I spoke, she listened too. Really listened. Not with politeness, but with presence. The night wore on, and the conversation slowed. Not from boredom, but because words weren't always necessary. At one point, she laid her head on my shoulder. "This is nice," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "It is." I wanted to ask her to stay again. Wanted to make it clear that I didn't want this to be temporary. But I held back. Because something told me she already knew. And maybe saying it out loud would break the magic. So we just sat there, two people who had no business finding each other in this big, chaotic city, but somehow did. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that neither of us had planned, but both of us welcomed with quiet enthusiasm. Sierra didn't return to the hotel right away. She said something about how sterile it felt, how the walls echoed in ways that made her feel lonelier than she'd like to admit. So she came back the next night. And the night after that. And soon, my once quiet apartment, previously marked by the occasional flicker of the television and the hum of the city beyond my window, now pulsed with her presence. Her laughter filled the air like music I didn't know I missed, and even her silences felt like company. She'd started to leave little pieces of herself around, her scarf on the back of the kitchen chair, a half-empty bottle of shampoo in my bathroom, a book face down on the coffee table with a corner folded where she left off. They weren't declarations. They weren't statements of permanence. But they were there, and they spoke louder than any words she could have said. I began to notice the way she observed the world, how she would pause mid-bite during dinner to comment on the colors of the sunset, reflecting off the glass of the building across the street, how she smiled at strangers with the kind of warmth that made them smile back even if they were in the middle of a bad day. Sierra didn't just move through the world, she paid attention to it, and that made being around her feel like I was seeing things clearly for the first time. We'd lie on the couch and she'd tell me about her childhood in Vermont, about how her mother used to grow sunflowers in the front yard so tall they towered over the windows. She talked about her father, a quiet man who built birdhouses in the garage and never missed her piano recitals, even though he could barely carry a tune himself. Those memories painted her in a different light, not as the poised woman in heels I had first picked up from the sidewalk, but as someone who had once run barefoot through the grass, who had scraped her knees and laughed about it. She asked about my family too, and for the first time in a long time, I opened up. I told her about my dad, how he worked 2 jobs, how he smelled like engine grease and Old Spice, how he had died too young but left behind a legacy of hard work and simple love. I talked about my mom, who never remarried, who raised my sister, and me with stubborn grace and unshakable faith that things would somehow be okay. Sierra listened without interruption, her hand resting lightly on my knee as if grounding me to the moment. It felt safe, which was a rarity. I wasn't used to being vulnerable. But she made it easy. Like I didn't have to try so hard. Like I could just be. Of course, not every moment was bliss. There were hiccups, small frictions that came from 2 people learning each other's rhythms. I was used to space, used to my things in a certain place, my evenings predictable and undisturbed. Sierra, on the other hand, had a kind of elegant chaos to her. She would leave cupboard doors open, start one task and get distracted halfway through, change the playlist 5 times in an hour depending on her mood. But where that might have annoyed me with anyone else, with her, it just felt human. It reminded me that we weren't trying to be perfect, we were just trying to be real. Then came the question. It was subtle at first. Over breakfast, she mentioned her return flight. It had been scheduled for 3 days from now. She hadn't said anything sooner. Neither had I. but the words hung in the air between us like smoke from a candle just snuffed out. "Do you think you'll go?" I asked, trying to sound neutral. She didn't answer right away. She stirred her coffee, looked out the window, then finally said, "I don't know." And that was it. We didn't push it further. But for the rest of the day, her presence felt more fragile, like she was already halfway gone. That night, as we lay in bed with the window open and the hum of the city filtering through, she reached over and ran her fingers along my jaw. "What are we doing?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the breeze. I didn't pretend not to understand. I knew what she meant. I turned to face her and said, "We're figuring it out." She nodded like that answer was enough. But we both knew that time was running out. Her flight was scheduled. Her life was elsewhere. And whatever this was, whatever we were building, it didn't have a blueprint yet. The next day, she was quiet. Not withdrawn, just contemplative. She spent an hour on the phone with her assistant, catching up on work, making notes in a small leather journal she carried with her. I watched from the kitchen, wondering if this was her easing back into the life she had momentarily stepped away from. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to rush it. But inside, a tension was building. That night, we didn't talk much. She fell asleep on the couch with her head in my lap, and I just sat there, watching her breathe, feeling the weight of the moment. And then came the morning, the day before her flight. She stood at the doorway with her suitcase, the same one she had barely unpacked. I thought about asking her to stay. The words danced on the tip of my tongue. But something held me back. Maybe pride, maybe fear. Maybe the belief that if it was real, she wouldn't need to be asked. She looked at me and said, "You've been the calm I didn't know I needed. Thank you." I swallowed the lump in my throat and managed a nod. She leaned in, kissed me softly, and said, "I'll call you." I watched her walk down the hall, turn the corner, and disappear from view. The days after Sierra left moved slowly, dragging behind them a kind of silence I hadn't known in years. It was a strange thing, how quickly someone could thread themselves into your routines, reshape the contours of your days, and then vanish, leaving behind echoes where presence used to be. Her scarf still hung on the back of the kitchen chair. I didn't move it. Her coffee mug sat near the sink, rinsed but not stored. I left that too. Not because I was clinging or sentimental in the usual sense, but because removing them felt like erasing proof that she'd ever been there. And I wasn't ready for that. I went back to driving the usual routes, early morning airport runs, late night shifts, weekend surges downtown, but everything felt muted. The conversations with passengers didn't hold weight anymore. Their stories faded as soon as they stepped out of the cab. And when I returned to my apartment each night, I'd half expect to find Sierra curled up on the couch, her hair pulled back, flipping through one of the books she'd plucked off my shelf. But it was always just me, just the quiet, just the emptiness pressing against the walls. She called 3 days later. Not a text, not a voicemail, an actual call. Her name lit up on the screen, and my heart thudded louder than the ringtone. I answered before the second ring. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain, as though she wasn't sure how she'd be received. "Hey," she said, like we'd only been apart a few hours instead of several days. I wanted to say so much. To tell her that I missed her, that the city felt off without her in it, that the apartment hadn't been the same since she closed the door behind her. But all I managed was, "Hey, you made it back okay?" She said she had. The flight was uneventful. The city greeted her with rain. Her hotel felt colder than she remembered. I listened, every word filling in the space she'd left behind. We talked for almost an hour. Nothing dramatic, just catching up. But beneath every laugh, every pause, was a shared understanding. We weren't done. Over the next week, our calls became more frequent. Sometimes short check-ins, other times late-night confessions. She told me about her meetings, the clients she had to entertain, the stress of corporate politicking. I told her about my mother's new recipe experiment, about the couple who argued in my cab for 10 straight minutes over what to order for dinner, about how I'd started writing again, just a little, nothing serious. Sierra encouraged it. She said she wanted to read something one day. I didn't tell her that the pages I'd been scribbling were mostly about her, about a woman who made the world feel a little less sharp, a little more bearable. I wasn't ready to say it out, loud. Not yet. Then one Thursday night she called and said, "I think I need a break from all this." I thought she meant the calls, the connection, the fragile thread we'd been weaving since she left. My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice even. "From what?" I asked. She hesitated. "From the hotel, from meetings, from the noise." A beat passed, and then she added, "Can I come back for a few days?" I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't need one. "Of course," I said. "Whenever you want." She arrived the next evening with a small bag and tired eyes. I met her at the curb like I had the first time, and for a moment, we both smiled at the full-circle nature of it all. But this time, when she stepped into the apartment, she didn't hover like a guest. She moved like someone who'd come home. We didn't talk about what we were. There were no labels, no awkward declarations. We just were. She slept in my bed, toes tangled with mine, her head nestled under my chin like it belonged there. In the mornings, I'd wake to the sound of the kettle boiling and her humming in the kitchen. Sometimes we talked about nothing. Sometimes we talked about everything. One night, as we lay watching the ceiling fan spin slowly above us, she said, "Do you think it's possible to feel safe with someone you barely know?" I turned to her and said, "I don't think time has anything to do with it. Some people just feel like safety." She didn't respond, but her fingers found mine under the sheets and squeezed. Still, as much as I wanted to live in that suspended moment, reality eventually came knocking. She had work obligations. She had a life rooted hundreds of miles away. And though she never said it outright, I could see it in the way her eyes lingered on her laptop screen longer each day, in the way her phone buzzed more often. I wanted to ask her to stay again. I wanted to say that we could figure it out, that she didn't need the skyline and the suits to feel fulfilled. But I also knew that if I loved her, even if I hadn't used that word yet, I had to let her choose for herself. So I didn't say it. I just watched her quietly, committing every detail to memory in case it became all I had left. The second time she left was harder. There was no packed suitcase by the door, no formal goodbye. Just a promise to visit again soon, and a kiss that felt like both a beginning and an end. After she left, I went back to the same patterns. Work, home, sleep, repeat. But something had shifted. Her presence had changed the way I looked at everything. Even the city felt different, less like a cage, and more like a place where anything could happen. I kept writing. I'd leave the notebook open on the kitchen table, pages half filled with thoughts I couldn't say aloud. And every night before I went to sleep, I'd check my phone. Not because I was waiting, but because I hoped. 2 weeks went by with only a couple of texts and one late-night call that ended in silence, and the quiet, heavy comfort of breathing on the other end. It was strange how quickly a life that had been filled with her laugh, her scent in the hallway, her coffee rituals, could be reduced to pixels in memory. I wasn't angry, at least not in the way people often are when they're abandoned. No doors were slammed, no promises were broken. But the ache settled into me slowly, like water rising under a closed door, and I knew it wasn't going anywhere soon. Sierra had always had a foot in another world, one filled with polished marble floors, designer luggage, conference calls, and silk blouses. I knew it when I first picked her up at the curb. I knew it the moment she offered me her business card, instead of a handshake. But knowing it didn't make it any easier when the space she left behind felt too large to fill. I tried to distract myself, to stay in motion. I picked up extra shifts. I volunteered to drive an elderly neighbor to her doctor's appointments. I fixed the railing on my building's stoop and helped my cousin paint his apartment. Anything to avoid being alone with the quiet. But no matter how full I kept my schedule, the nights still felt hollow. I'd stand at the window sometimes, looking out at the scattered lights of the city, wondering if she was doing the same thing. If the skyscrapers where she stayed were casting the same shadows, if she ever thought about me when the world slowed down. Then, one night, I saw the scarf. Her scarf. The one she wore the night I first met her. It had been buried under a pile of laundry, forgotten in the chaos of her departure. I picked it up, pressed it to my face, and for the first time since, she left. I allowed myself to miss her out loud. And that was the beginning of something shifting inside me. Because it wasn't just missing her. It was missing what she brought out in me. When she was around, I was lighter, more alive. I saw possibilities instead of limits. She challenged me to believe I was more than a driver, more than a man tied to a zip code or a routine. She never said it directly, but her presence had done something none of my friends, none of my past relationships had managed. It made me want to grow. Not for her, but because I saw myself through her eyes, and I liked who I was becoming. That realization sat with me for days, until one morning I woke up and made a decision. If she wasn't going to come back into my world, I would step into hers, not recklessly, not to chase, but to close the distance and see what might still be waiting. I reached out with a simple message. I have a weekend off. I'll be in your city. Thought maybe we could catch up over coffee. No pressure. I didn't expect an answer right away, and I didn't get one. But that Friday, as I stepped off the train with an overnight bag and no real plan beyond a cheap hotel and a couple good coffee shops bookmarked on my phone, my heart beat with a mix of hope and anxiety. I wasn't good at putting myself out there. I wasn't the guy who took chances on love. But this wasn't about being brave. It was about being honest, with myself, with her, with the thing that had grown between us, quietly and insistently. She texted me that evening. A simple, "You're really here?" followed by an address. No smiley face, no exclamation marks, just a street and a time. I stared at it for a full minute before replying. "See you then." The next morning, I walked into the cafe 10 minutes early and sat near the window, sipping black coffee and trying to look casual while every nerve in my body screamed. When she walked in, everything else fell away. She looked tired but beautiful, like someone who'd been carrying too much but still managed to glow through it all. She smiled when she saw me, and that was enough to melt every question I'd rehearsed on the train. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about work and family, and the space that had stretched between us like a thread pulled too tight. She didn't apologize for leaving. I didn't ask her to. But somewhere between the second coffee and the shared muffin, she said, "I thought it'd be easier to stay away." It wasn't. That afternoon, she showed me her world, the side I'd only glimpsed through late-night calls and passing mentions. We walked through a park she liked, browsed a bookstore tucked between two high-rises, laughed over dumplings at a place she said most people missed because the sign was faded. And as the sun dipped below the skyline, she looked at me and asked, "What happens now?" I didn't have a perfect answer, but I said the only thing that felt true. "I didn't come here to get anything from you. I came because I didn't want to wonder for the rest of my life what we could have been." She nodded slowly, and for the first time since she left, she reached for my hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. That night, we sat in silence on a park bench, the city buzzing around us, and I felt peace. Not because everything was fixed or certain, but because we'd stepped back into the same space, willingly, bravely. And sometimes, that's all love needs, a door held open, and the courage to walk through. The weeks that followed felt like living in the in-between, somewhere between old routines and new possibilities. After our brief weekend in her city, I returned home not with the aching emptiness I had felt before, but with a strange sense of calm. There was no grand confession, no declarations, no promises, but what we shared during those hours spoke louder than any words ever could. Sierra didn't suddenly drop her life and move closer, and I didn't ask her to. I went back to driving, to fixing things around the neighborhood, to spending quiet evenings with a book or music playing low. But something had changed. Some switch inside had flipped, because now her presence lingered not as a memory but as a quiet, steady hope. We messaged more often, not constantly, but enough to bridge the miles between us. She'd send me photos of quirky things she saw on her commute. I'd snap shots of a sunset over the bridge or an alley mural she'd once admired. Sometimes we'd call, and neither of us would have much to say. But there was comfort in those, Silences, like leaning your head on someone's shoulder at the end of a long day. We were trying, slowly and carefully, to build something real. Something not bound by proximity or swept away by romantic impulse. And then came her mother's birthday. Sierra had mentioned it offhandedly during one of our calls, complaining about the pressure to host a big dinner at her place, and how exhausting it felt to juggle family obligations while keeping her work afloat. I remembered how tired her eyes had looked that day in the cafe, and I offered something impulsive but sincere. I told her I could help. She laughed at first, assuming I meant moral support. But when I clarified that I was offering to drive over for the weekend and help with the setup, she went quiet. And then she said yes. It wasn't a grand gesture. I wasn't flying across the world or pulling off some elaborate plan. I was simply showing up. And as I packed my bag that Friday, making sure to include the button-down she once complimented, and the toolkit I figured might come in handy, I felt something settle in my chest. A blend of nerves and anticipation, of stepping into a role I wasn't sure I was ready for, but deeply wanted to fill. Her apartment looked different in daylight, warmer, lived in. There were signs of her daughter's presence, a stuffed bunny on the couch, crayon marks on the corner of a white wall, a pair of tiny shoes by the door. Olivia had been visiting her father the last time I came, but this weekend, she was home. Meeting Sierra's daughter felt like the truest test of whatever it was we were becoming. I'd always been good with kids, my cousins, my goddaughter, the neighbors' kids I occasionally helped with school pickups. But this was different. Olivia was bright and watchful, her energy soft rather than loud. She greeted me with a shy wave, then disappeared behind Sierra's legs. Over the next few hours, as we cleaned the apartment and arranged the dining table, I found myself slowly winning her over. I showed her how to fold napkins into little triangles and let her choose the music for the background playlist. Sierra watched us with a mix of amusement and something else. Something that looked a lot like affection, but carried the weight of caution. That evening, as guests began to arrive, I slipped into the background. I didn't want to take up space or draw attention. I was just there to help. But Sierra kept pulling me back into the circle, introducing me to her cousins, inviting me to join the group photos, passing me a glass of wine with a wink when she thought no one was watching. I caught her mother watching us once, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. Later, she cornered me in the kitchen and asked, "So, you're the man who drove my daughter to the airport and made her miss her flight?" I froze, unsure if she was joking or scolding. But then she smiled and added, "Thank you for doing that." She needed someone who would listen for a change. I nodded, and for a moment, we stood there in quiet agreement. Two people who loved Sierra in different ways but wanted the same thing for her, peace. That night, after the last guest left and Olivia was asleep in her room, Sierra and I sat on the balcony, a shared blanket over our legs, 2 mugs of tea warming our hands. The city stretched out before us, glittering and alive. She leaned into me, not saying much, just resting her head on my shoulder. I wanted to tell her then how deeply I cared, how I saw a future in this strange dance we'd been doing. But instead, I said something simpler. "You're doing great, you know." She laughed softly, not in disbelief but in gratitude. "Some days, I don't feel like I am." I looked at her then, not just her polished exterior but the layers beneath. The strength it took to raise a child, run a business, hold space, for a life that didn't always go as planned. And I told her the truth. "That's how I know you are." There was a pause, then a kiss. Not rushed, not dramatic. Just a quiet affirmation of everything unspoken between us. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't about a ride to the airport anymore. It wasn't about happenstance or timing. It was about choosing each other, over and over, in small moments and big ones. And I wasn't going anywhere, not unless she asked me to. But from the way she held on to me that night, I had a feeling she wouldn't. The days following that night on Sierra's balcony felt quieter. Like the moment after a song ends but the melody still lingers in your chest. I didn't leave first thing the next morning. I helped clean up the birthday remnants, swept crumbs off the hardwood floor, wiped down wine glasses that clinked too loudly in the sink. Olivia, waking up with her usual sleep-heavy eyes, sat at the kitchen table as I made pancakes, and when she asked if I was staying for breakfast, Sierra didn't correct her. The ease of those small, shared routines left an impression I couldn't shake. When I finally did go, the goodbye wasn't dramatic or drawn out. Sierra just stood in the doorway with Olivia on her hip, watching me walk down the hall, and I could feel the weight of it. The way things had shifted again, become more rooted. Like a thread had been quietly tied between her door and my life. I went back to my routine, but it wasn't the same anymore. Every time I looked at my phone, there was a part of me that expected her name to pop up. Sometimes, it did. A photo of Olivia painting. A snapshot of a cloudy skyline with the caption, "Your kind of day." A quick voice note saying she missed my pancakes. They weren't grand declarations, but each message was a breadcrumb. Evidence of something slowly building between us, steady and sure. Work began to feel more mechanical, like my hands were going through the motions while my mind drifted to moments that had nothing to do with hammers or hinges. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way people waited at crosswalks with their heads down. The way old couples sat in silence but seemed completely in sync. The sound of birds in the morning that reminded me of how Olivia would hum when she was concentrating. Everything started to carry a piece of Sierra, like my world had quietly folded hers into its seams. My friends noticed the change too. One night, over beers on the stoop, my buddy Ray finally asked, "You seeing someone or just real deep into rom-com reruns?" I laughed it off, but the truth was harder to explain. I didn't have a label for what Sierra and I were. We weren't officially dating. We hadn't said the words, but we were something real. And then, as life tends to do, the moment tested us. Sierra called one night sounding exhausted. Her sitter had fallen through last minute. She had a client dinner she couldn't cancel, and Olivia had a fever. I could hear the guilt in her voice, like she was apologizing just for asking, even though she hadn't said a word. I didn't hesitate. I told her I'd be there in an hour, and I was. I showed up with a thermos of soup, a box of crayons, and a small plush bunny I'd found at a gas station because it looked like the one Olivia had left on the couch the first time I visited. Sierra met me at the door, eyes rimmed with worry. And as I stepped inside, I realized this, showing up, no questions asked, was what it meant to care for someone, to really care. I stayed with Olivia while Sierra went to the dinner, and though the little girl was tired and cranky, she eventually fell asleep curled beside me on the couch. When Sierra returned hours later, kicking off her heels and whispering thank yous, I told her it was nothing. But the way her hand lingered on mine said she knew it was something. Things moved differently after that. Not faster, just deeper. We didn't talk about commitment or future plans. There were no ultimatums or timelines. Just presence. I met Sierra's friends at a gallery opening one weekend. I helped Olivia with a school project about planets and built her a cardboard Saturn with glitter rings that ended up sticking to my jeans for days. Sierra started showing up in my world too, dropping by with lunch while I was working a double shift, sitting in on card games with my neighbors, helping my aunt pick flowers at the market. She fit in like she'd always been there, and no one blinked at her presence. It was as if the universe had been quietly preparing a place for her in my life all along. But not everything was easy. There were rough patches. Moments where our differences surfaced like sharp stones beneath calm water. Her world, as independent and grounded as she was, still came with demands I didn't always understand. Late meetings, client emergencies, the occasional guarded silence when she was processing too much. And me? I still carried the weight of wanting to be enough. I still worried about showing up empty-handed, about not matching her pace or ambition. There were times when I wondered if I was just a break in her storm. A quiet place she could catch her breath before returning to the real world. But each time I asked myself that question, something happened to answer it for me. A note tucked into my bag that read, "Thanks for being my calm." A voice message late at night where she whispered, "I sleep better knowing you're out there." And once, in the middle of a chaotic Monday, a photo of Olivia holding up a drawing she made at school, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath the sun. "This is us," she'd written in crooked crayon letters. Those small, quiet affirmations kept me anchored. Still, the uncertainty lingered. We hadn't talked about the future. We hadn't defined what we were, and as much as I tried to play it cool, the not knowing started to eat at me. I didn't want to rush her, didn't want to push, but I needed to know, was I just the guy who showed up when she needed help, or was I someone she saw in her every day? I held off asking for as long as I could, until one evening, sitting on her couch with Olivia asleep between us, Sierra turned to me and said, "You know, I never thought someone like you would stay." I looked at her then, really looked, and I realized she'd been asking herself the same questions I had. Maybe she was afraid too, afraid to believe in something soft after everything she'd been through. And maybe that was the most human thing about love. Not the grand gestures or the perfect moments, but the quiet choosing of each other, even when fear whispered that it might not last. The moment Sierra uttered those quiet, vulnerable words, "I never thought someone like you would stay," something in me shifted. It wasn't triumph or relief, but something deeper, a recognition of the courage it takes to let someone see your fears and still remain standing. I didn't need her to say anything else. That one sentence carried the weight of everything we'd been dancing around for weeks. We sat there in silence, her shoulder barely brushing mine, with Olivia's small sleeping form stretched across both our laps like a bridge we'd been building unintentionally, day by day. I didn't respond with a grand declaration, no sweeping promises. I just leaned in closer and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere," and that was enough. Her hand found mine, no hesitation, and we stayed like that for a long time, the soft hum of the night wrapping around us like a blanket. That evening marked a turning point, not the explosive, cinematic kind, but the subtle kind that gently reroutes the trajectory of two lives. Over the next few weeks, something about us became unspokenly official. There was no announcement, no DTR conversation over candlelight. We just started existing more fully in each other's routines. I had a spare toothbrush at her place. She left her cardigan in the backseat of my car and didn't ask for it back. I was at school events with Olivia, and Sierra was cooking rice on my mom's stove like she'd been doing it for years. The people around us caught on before we even did. My sister would tease me when Sierra's name came up. Her friends started addressing me with familiarity, like they knew I'd be sticking around. Even Olivia, who once hesitated around new people, would now reach for my hand at random, guiding me toward the next game, the next moment, the next layer of connection. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it felt real, honest, earned. Still, just as we were settling into that rhythm, the past came knocking, as it always does. One afternoon, Sierra was pacing the living room, phone pressed tight to her ear, her voice low and tense. I'd never heard her sound like that. Measured, polite, but clearly strained. When she hung up, she stood there frozen for a moment before saying, "That was Jason." I didn't need clarification. Her ex, Olivia's father, the man who had been more ghost than presence up until now. "He's coming to the city," she added, voice tight. "He wants to see Olivia. He says he's changed." I watched her carefully, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she crossed her arms, how she blinked too fast like she was holding something back. I didn't ask questions. I just walked over and pulled her into a hug, holding her until the tension began to loosen. I didn't have advice. I didn't need to offer solutions. I just needed her to know she didn't have to face this alone. When Jason finally arrived, I didn't meet him. That was Sierra's call. She wanted to handle it without complication, without distraction. She met him at a nearby park while I stayed with Olivia, and although I was curious, maybe even anxious, I knew it wasn't about me. It was about her past meeting her present, and the space between them needing to be bridged or closed. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. She looked tired, yes, but also resolved. "He asked for another chance," she told me, her voice measured. "Not with me, with Olivia. He wants to be a better father. He says he's in therapy now, that he regrets everything." I could hear the hesitation, the skepticism buried underneath. She wasn't naive, but she wasn't vengeful either. She'd always been the type to give people more grace than they probably deserved. "I told him he could try," she added, "but slowly, on Olivia's terms, and mine." I nodded, respecting her strength, her boundaries, her ability to lead with compassion while still protecting what mattered most. The weeks that followed were filled with careful coordination. Supervised visits, guarded conversations, a trial run of what co-parenting might look like after years of silence. Olivia, to her credit, handled it with more maturity than most adults. She didn't leap into Jason's arms. She didn't reject him either. She observed, questioned, and cautiously participated. It wasn't easy for any of us. There were moments I felt the quiet sting of insecurity, wondering if this man from her past might reclaim something I had only just begun to build. But then Sierra would look at me with those steady eyes, or Olivia would crawl into my lap and ask me to read her favorite book. And I'd remember that love isn't threatened by other people. It's only threatened by absence, by silence, by the refusal to show up when it matters. One evening, after Olivia had gone to bed and the dishes were done, Sierra sat beside me on the couch and said, "I'm scared." She wasn't referring to Jason. She was talking about us, about how good things had gotten, how natural it felt, how deep it had grown without either of us realizing just how far we'd traveled from that first ride to the airport. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted. "Like maybe I don't deserve this. Maybe it's too much to ask for it all to keep going well." I reached for her hand, ran my thumb gently over her knuckles, and said, "It's not too much, it's exactly enough." And she let out a breath like she'd been holding it for months. From that night on, the fear didn't disappear, but it no longer ruled us. We began talking more openly about the future, about what it might look like to merge our lives more intentionally. She invited me to a family gathering, her aunt's birthday party, and I watched with quiet awe as she stood there introducing me not as a friend, but as someone important. And I did the same, bringing her to my mom's Sunday dinners, letting her sit beside me in the booth where I'd eaten the same spaghetti every week since childhood. It wasn't grand, but it was sacred in its own way. The merging of worlds, the soft fusion of two lives slowly deciding they belonged to the same story. It was sometime in early fall when the world outside began trading its humid intensity for crisp breezes and fire-colored leaves, and I realized just how deeply woven Sierra had become into the fabric of my life. Not in some cinematic, over-the-top firework kind of way, but quietly, in the way light slips through blinds and reshapes a room. Every morning now seemed to begin with her in some form, whether it was a leftover coffee mug on my counter, a text with a picture of Olivia's outfit for school, or just the lingering scent of her shampoo from the night before. The line between what was mine and what was hers blurred, not because we forced it, but because it no longer made sense to keep the two separate. I'd find myself thinking about what groceries to grab and automatically pick up her almond milk or Olivia's favorite cereal. My mother, once reserved about letting people too quickly into our circle, had now taken to calling Sierra directly about Sunday dinner menus or offering to babysit, just so the two of us could go out without a child between us every once in a while. Still, for all the comfort that routine provided, I started to notice the faint tension building behind Sierra's eyes again, like something unsaid was pressing harder each day. She'd brush it off, claiming it was work stress or scheduling issues with Jason and the shared parenting agreement that was still finding its shape, but I knew her well enough by now to recognize when she was dodging. It wasn't until one evening, when we were walking through a neighborhood fall festival with Olivia bouncing between us, that she finally said it. Not with drama or tears, just plainly. "I got offered a promotion," she said, eyes on the glowing Ferris wheel in the distance. "It's big, more than I imagined, but it's in Boston." The words landed like an unexpected gust of wind, not knocking me over, but stirring everything loose inside me. For a moment, I just stood there, watching Olivia tug at a caramel apple stand. Then I nodded slowly, trying to piece together my response from 100 fragmented thoughts. "I didn't say yes," she added quickly, reading my silence. "I haven't even told them I'm considering it. I wanted to talk to you first. I didn't expect this now." I could hear the conflict in her voice, the sincere pull of ambition against the roots we'd begun planting here, and I couldn't blame her for it. She had worked hard, harder than most, to rebuild her life after a divorce and years of self-doubt. She deserved opportunities, deserved to rise, but still, it hurt. Not because she was chasing a career, but because it reminded me that no matter how close two people grow, life doesn't stop offering them paths that may not walk side by side. We walked a bit further without saying much, just letting the noise of laughter and music fill the space that neither of us could. When we got back to the car, she leaned against the door and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Equal parts hope and heartbreak. "I don't want to go," she said, "but I also don't want to stay for the wrong reasons." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning everything over in my mind. What it would mean for her to leave, for us to try long distance, for Olivia to be 2 states away. And then there was the selfish part of me, the one that hated the idea of waking up without her laughter in the kitchen, or missing Tuesday night dinners where Olivia narrated her school drama like a soap opera. I wanted to ask her to stay. I wanted to promise that we could make something just as meaningful here, that opportunities would come again. But I also knew what it felt like to have someone try to dim your light to keep you close. I'd seen it with my own mother, who had given up college, travel, everything to raise us after Dad died. And while I loved her for it, I'd always sensed the shadow of sacrifice in her eyes. I didn't want to become that shadow for Sierra. A few days later, Sierra brought it up again, this time after Olivia had gone to bed and the house had settled into that familiar hush. "I'm scared," she said, curling her legs underneath her on the couch. "Not just about leaving, but about what staying means too. I'm scared to want this much, to build something this real, and still wonder if I'm letting go of something else." I reached for her hand and held it tightly. "You're allowed to want both," I said. "You're allowed to be ambitious, and still need love. This isn't either or." She nodded, but I could see the tears welling at the corners of her eyes. I wanted to be everything she needed, but I knew I couldn't make the decision for her. All I could do was show her that whatever choice she made, I wasn't going to be the one to punish her for it. When the decision finally came, it didn't arrive with fanfare or celebration. It came over coffee on a quiet Sunday, when Sierra slid her phone across the table and said, "I declined it." I looked at her, waiting for the catch. "They said they understood," she added, "that they'd keep me on their radar." But I knew the moment I heard Olivia talk about her new art teacher and how she finally made a friend in her class. I knew we couldn't uproot all of this. Not yet. Relief flooded through me, but so did awe. Not because she stayed for me, but because she stayed for her life, the one we had been building. Not perfect or polished, but real and full. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. She smiled and leaned across the table to kiss me. I've never been more sure of anything. The weeks after that felt like a second spring. Everything seemed to bloom again. Not because everything was perfect, but because we had chosen this, intentionally, together. Olivia started calling me Eli, with a kind of affection that made my chest swell. Sierra and I began slowly combining our spaces, sharing calendars, making joint decisions. We didn't move in officially yet, but we were close. Everything had become seamless, flowing like rivers that had always meant to meet. I still drove my usual route, still picked up late-night shifts when we needed the extra cash, but now it felt different. Now every dollar saved wasn't just for bills. It was for the future, for a home, for a life I didn't stumble into but carefully grew toward. Life took on a rhythm that felt more grounded, more permanent than I ever expected from something that began with such randomness. The way Sierra fit into my life didn't feel like something I had to force into place. It felt like it had always been there, just waiting to be discovered. The mornings were especially peaceful, not because they were quiet, but because they were alive. Olivia would come bounding into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair a mess, always asking if I could pack her lunch even when Sierra had already done it. It became our thing, our little moment before the day scattered us all in different directions. Sierra would be at the stove, making eggs or pancakes, sometimes singing off-key to the radio as I drank coffee and watched them both move around the kitchen like they were painting a picture I didn't want to blink and miss. There was a calm to it that I hadn't known I was chasing. A sense that, finally, I was waking up in a life that didn't feel temporary. Still, there were moments when I'd sit in my car after a shift, engine off, just listening to the city hum around me, wondering how it all happened, how a random airport ride had unraveled into this slow, beautiful entanglement. It wasn't that I didn't feel deserving, more that I was cautious. Life had taught me that good things don't always stay, that comfort has a tendency to slip through your fingers the moment you stop holding on tight. I didn't want to grip it too tightly, but I also didn't want to take any of it for granted. I made a habit of checking in with Sierra, making sure she felt supported, valued, not just loved but really seen. And she did the same for me, often in the smallest of ways. Folding my laundry when I was too tired to do it, leaving notes in my glove compartment when I worked late, whispering encouragement in the dark when I felt too stretched between work and home. One afternoon, as fall began giving way to winter, we took a walk through the park near Olivia's school. Leaves had fallen in golden piles, and Olivia was stomping through them like she was on a mission. Sierra had her hand in mine, our fingers interlaced beneath her coat sleeve. She looked over at me with that same half-smile I'd come to understand, meant she was thinking hard about something. "Do you ever think about what it would be like to start over completely?" she asked. I nodded, curious where she was going with it. "Like, pick a different city, sell everything, just go." I chuckled, not because the idea was ridiculous, but because I knew how much that fantasy appealed to people who had been through hard things. Starting over always sounds easier than fighting to build something better from what you already have. But I didn't want to start over. I wanted to grow from here, with her. "I used to," I said, "but not anymore. Because for the first time, I'm not running from anything. I'm running towards something." Later that night, Sierra curled up beside me on the couch as we watched Olivia's favorite animated movie for what had to be the 10th time. She rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I think this might be it. This might be the thing I was always trying to find in every wrong place." I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. I just kissed the top of her head and let the moment hang in the air, warm and full. We had stopped needing to narrate every feeling, stopped trying to define things too early. We let it breathe, let it become what it needed to be without force. And yet, even in the peace, life kept throwing its curveballs. One evening, Sierra got a call from Jason, Olivia's father. He'd been offered a job back in the city and wanted to be more involved in Olivia's life. It was something Sierra had always wished for, but the timing was fragile. We didn't know what it would look like, or how it might shift the dynamics we had grown comfortable in. Olivia was excited, of course. The idea of seeing her dad more frequently made her bubble with joy, but I could feel the hesitation in Sierra's posture. The unknowns rattled her. "What if it confuses her?" she asked. "What if we finally give her stability, and it just gets torn apart again?" I didn't have the answers, but I knew we had to approach it like everything else, with openness, patience, and a united front. "Whatever happens," I told her, "she'll be okay, because now she's got all of us in her corner." And so, we navigated it. We scheduled dinners with Jason to talk logistics. We reassured Olivia that nothing was changing in her day-to-day life. I even went out of my way to talk with Jason, not as a rival, but as a man who cared deeply for the same little girl. It wasn't easy. There were tensions, awkwardness, moments when I felt like I was being measured against a past I hadn't lived. But slowly, it began to settle. We found a rhythm. Sierra and Jason learned how to co-parent with clearer boundaries, and I learned how to support without overstepping. Olivia, for her part, thrived in the extra love and attention. Meanwhile, Sierra's business picked up momentum again. Word of mouth spread, and her event planning calendar filled quickly with weddings, fundraisers, and corporate retreats. She was good at it. More than good, she was remarkable. Watching her walk into a room and transform it from chaos to beauty was something that left me stunned every time. I'd help when I could, loading tables, hanging lights, being her extra pair of hands and eyes when the hours got long. We were a team in every sense of the word. She'd say things like, "I couldn't do this without you." And while I knew she probably could, I also knew she didn't want to. And that made all the difference. By December, the cold had settled in, and our evenings were spent beneath thick blankets, sipping hot cocoa while Olivia tried to convince us to let her Open just one present early. Sierra and I had started talking more seriously about the future, about moving in together, about what it might look like to combine our households officially. It wasn't a question of if anymore, just a matter of when. We both had wounds from the past, both knew the danger of rushing, but we also knew what we had was real, built not in a rush of passion, but in the quiet consistency of showing up every day. And so, life became a beautiful balance of new traditions and old routines. We had created something not by running from our histories, but by choosing to build something worthy with what we had left. Sierra no longer looked over her shoulder in fear of things falling apart, and I no longer felt like the guy who was just trying to get through the week. We had become something steady, something worth protecting. And even though it all started with a simple ride to the airport, I knew, without doubt, that we had both arrived exactly where we were meant to be. The holidays came and went in a whirlwind of laughter, mismatched decorations, and moments so sweet they felt almost cinematic. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was watching the world celebrate from the outside. I was in it, part of something warm and real. Christmas morning arrived with the sound of Olivia tearing through wrapping paper, squealing, at a stuffed unicorn Sierra had secretly found weeks ago. The living room was a patchwork of discarded bows and half-assembled toys, and in the middle of it all was Sierra, still in pajamas, coffee in hand, eyes dancing as she watched her daughter glow with joy. I was sitting beside them, legs stretched out, heart so full it felt like it could spill out of my chest. Olivia ran over and threw her arms around both of us, shouting, "This is the best Christmas ever!" And I believed her. I believed it because I felt the same. After the holidays, we returned to the rhythm we had built, a life that felt more and more like home with each passing day. Sierra's event business surged, thanks to a glowing profile piece written by a local lifestyle magazine that called her the city's most emotionally intuitive planner. The phrase made her laugh every time she read it aloud. But I saw how it made her stand taller, walk with a little more certainty in her step. Her confidence, once brittle from past heartbreak and professional setbacks, had begun to root itself again. I cheered her on from the sidelines, happy to be her helper, her muscle, her guy with a truck who could lift things and run errands and make sure the lights were all working before her clients ever walked through the door. She called me her coordinator of calm, and while I teased her about the title, I secretly loved it, because that's what we were doing, creating calm, building a foundation where stress didn't eat away at the love. Still, like all things, we weren't without our struggles. Jason's presence in Olivia's life was steady, but occasionally disruptive. He was inconsistent with plans, often bailing last minute, leaving Olivia disappointed and Sierra quietly angry. I'd see her bite her lip, holding back words she didn't want to say in front of Olivia. We had long talks about it once Olivia went to bed, about boundaries, expectations, and what fairness looked like in a blended world. Sierra handled it all with more grace than I think she gave herself credit for. She never badmouthed him in front of Olivia, never tried to erase his role as a father, even when his actions made her want to scream. "She'll see it one day," she'd say quietly, "but I don't want to be the one who paints him as the villain." And then there was Maddie, my sister, who had started coming around more. She was older now, in her final year of high school, and beginning to see life through a wider lens. Her early frustrations with me spending more time with Sierra had softened, replaced by curiosity and, slowly, admiration. She and Olivia bonded quickly, and before long, Maddie was babysitting on weekends and coming to Sierra's events as a junior assistant. I watched her blossom under Sierra's mentorship, developing her own sense of purpose and realizing she had more to offer the world than just surviving school and waiting for adulthood to happen. Ruth, my mom, was slower to warm up. Not because she disliked Sierra, quite the opposite, but because she worried I was giving everything to someone again, putting all my eggs in a single fragile basket. She'd been there when my last relationship crumbled, when the heartbreak made me retreat from everything and everyone. "Just make sure you're not losing yourself," she said one night, as we stood on her front porch. "You've always had a big heart, Danny. Don't forget to leave some of it for yourself." I nodded, not dismissing her concern, but also knowing deep down that this time, it was different. One cold February night, Sierra and I were slow dancing in the living room. No music played, just the faint hum of the city outside, and Olivia snoring lightly from the next room. Her arms were around my neck, eyes half closed, head resting against my chest. "Do you think we're rushing it?" she whispered. "This whole life thing?" I kissed her temple and shook my head. "I think we're right on time." She sighed, a content, bone-deep exhale that felt like a yes. We talked about moving in together, officially. No more bouncing between her apartment and mine. We started looking at places, not because we weren't happy where we were, but because we wanted something that was ours from the start, something that held both our names on the lease, and maybe eventually, something even more permanent. Olivia was all for it. "Can I have a bigger room?" she asked during one tour. "And a puppy?" Sierra laughed, but I saw the gears turning in her head. Then came a turning point I never expected. One morning, while helping Sierra set up a venue for a massive corporate gala, she tripped on a loose cable and sprained her ankle badly. It wasn't life-threatening, but it sidelined her during one of her busiest weeks of the season. She tried to power through, hobbling on crutches, making calls from the couch, but I could see it weighing on her. So I stepped up. I took the reins. I coordinated with vendors, oversaw installations, double-checked schedules, and managed her team the best I could. I made mistakes, sure. Forgot to confirm catering once and nearly booked a DJ with the wrong date. But Sierra coached me through it, and somehow, we made it all work. The event was a success, and the client never knew how close things came to unraveling. Afterward, Sierra looked at me, her eyes glassy with gratitude and exhaustion. "You're more than just my partner," she whispered. "You're my safety net." And that was it. That was the moment I realized we weren't building something fragile. We were building something unshakable. Not perfect, not without cracks or late-night doubts, but strong in the places that mattered. We had started with a ride to the airport, a favor, a chance encounter, but somehow, through quiet mornings, late-night confessions, and showing up when it counted, we had stitched our lives together into something whole. I didn't just love Sierra. I trusted her. I respected her. I believed in the life we were creating, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I never wanted her to leave. Not the city, not this house, not this life. And thankfully, she felt the same. The seasons began to change again. That subtle shift in the air when winter loses its grip and spring starts whispering its promises through cracked windows and thawing sidewalks. It had been almost a full year since I gave Sierra that ride to the airport, and when I looked back on that night, it didn't feel like the beginning of something random. It felt like a moment that had been waiting to happen for years. Sierra's ankle had healed, and though she was back to orchestrating events with her signature grace, something had shifted in her approach. She moved a little slower, more intentionally, not just because of the injury, but because she had realized the value in letting others help. She started delegating more, trusting her team, and leaning on me without guilt or fear that it made her look weak. Watching her evolve like that was beautiful, not just because it made life easier, but because it meant she was finally allowing herself to be supported, to be loved in the ways she had always deserved. Meanwhile, my own routine had quietly transformed. I was still driving, still taking odd jobs here and there to keep things moving. But now my schedule was built around something bigger than survival. It was built around us. Around making Olivia's school pickups on time. Around being home for dinner. Around helping Sierra chase her dreams without having to do it alone. My mother had stopped asking if I was sure about this path. And Maddie, who was now applying to colleges, looked at me like I'd done something brave instead of something risky. The truth was, I had never felt more stable, more grounded, or more excited about tomorrow. We'd signed a lease on a new apartment a few blocks from Olivia's school. Nothing fancy, but bright and warm and full of promise. Olivia had picked the room with the slanted ceiling because she said it looked like a secret castle. And Sierra had claimed the kitchen as her sanctuary, already planning herb boxes and vintage wall art. For me, it wasn't the space that mattered. It was the fact that it would be ours. A clean slate. A fresh start. Moving day arrived with a chaotic kind of joy. Boxes were everywhere. Sierra was barefoot, dancing between piles with her hair up in a messy bun, and Olivia was busy assigning names to the dust bunnies she found under furniture. We had takeout on the floor that night, paper plates and laughter echoing off the walls that still smelled faintly of fresh paint. When the last box was finally shoved aside and Olivia had passed out in her new castle room, Sierra curled up beside me on the couch and whispered, "This feels right, doesn't it?" I kissed the top of her head and whispered back, "Yeah," like we finally stopped wandering. There was no ceremony to it, no dramatic declarations, just comfort, just truth. But life, as it always does, tested us again soon after. Sierra's ex, Jason, announced that he was moving out of state for a new job and wanted to take Olivia for a full summer to strengthen their bond. Sierra was blindsided. Olivia had never been away from her for more than a week, and the idea of letting her go, even temporarily, felt like tearing off a piece of herself. We talked about it endlessly, weighing pros and cons, legal options, emotional tolls. Sierra didn't want to seem unreasonable or controlling, but she also knew Jason's track record. "He loves her. I know he does," she said one night, pacing the living room. "But he's not consistent. He gets distracted. What if she needs something and I'm not there?" I wanted to fix it, to fight for her, to march into a courtroom and make it all make sense. But I also knew that this had to be her choice. I could support her, but I couldn't make it for her. After weeks of negotiation, they agreed on a compromise. Olivia would spend half the summer with Jason, with check-ins and scheduled visits, and Sierra would have the other half to travel, or recharge, or, as she put it, learn how to breathe without panicking every time someone else is driving the ship. When the day came to put Olivia on that plane, Sierra held it together for her daughter's sake. Smiles, hugs, promises. But the moment the plane was in the air, she broke. Not loudly. Just a quiet kind of unraveling, the tears she had been holding back for weeks spilling onto my shoulder. We sat in the car for a long time, engine off, her hand in mine, saying nothing. It wasn't a sadness born from lack of trust. It was the grief of temporary separation, of surrendering control. And as hard as it was, it brought us closer. There was a tenderness in that pain, a shared understanding that sometimes love meant letting go, even when it hurt. In the weeks that followed, Sierra threw herself into work, but not in the frantic way she used to. She started mentoring young planners, offering guidance and opportunities to women who reminded her of herself a decade ago. I watched her host workshops, give interviews, build a network that went beyond business. It was a community, and I couldn't help but admire her even more for that. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was rising, bringing others with her. And me? I kept driving, but I also started writing. Just for myself at first. Little snippets of our story, journal entries, reflections on fatherhood, partnership, growth. It was cathartic, and it gave me a sense of voice I hadn't realized I'd lost in the hustle of daily life. One afternoon, Sierra found one of my pages sitting on the kitchen counter. She read it, eyes wide, and said, "You should publish these, or at least share them somewhere." I shrugged, shy, unsure. But the way she looked at me, like I had said something important without even realizing it, planted a seed. Maybe I would. Maybe telling our story could help someone else see that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures or planned moments. It often shows up in the everyday, in the rides we offer, the hands we hold, the rooms we share. We were proof of that. The first half of the summer without Olivia passed like a slow ache in the background of everything we did. Even when we laughed, even when we found joy in little things, like lazy Sundays on the balcony or the late-night diner runs, we pretended were spontaneous but had already become a tradition. There was always that quiet undercurrent, that space where Olivia's energy used to fill the room. Sierra adjusted the way a mother does, strong on the surface, but unraveling in small ways when no one was watching. Sometimes I'd catch her folding laundry that wasn't even dirty, just to feel busy. Sometimes she'd stand still in the hallway, staring at Olivia's drawings taped to the wall as if waiting for them to speak. I didn't try to pull her out of it, I just stayed close, made sure I was her anchor. I understood now that love wasn't always about fixing things. Sometimes love was simply about being present in the silence. The more time we spent together, the more our rhythms solidified. I learned her quirks, like how she hated the sound of ticking clocks, or how she organized the kitchen spices by emotional categories: comfort, celebration, calm. She learned mine too, that I liked to hum when I was thinking, that I had a soft spot for old jazz records, that I needed my space in the morning before coffee turned me into a person again. We didn't tiptoe around each other anymore. If she was tired, she said it. If I was frustrated, I showed it. And instead of pulling apart, we leaned in. There was something beautiful about being able to be flawed in front of someone without fear. Vulnerability wasn't a liability in our home, it was currency. And still, amid the comfort of our growing bond, we both held parts of ourselves quietly in reserve. There was a moment, one evening in early July, when Sierra looked at me across the dinner table, wine glass half full, eyes reflecting something heavy. "Do you ever think we're just pretending this is enough?" she asked. I paused, fork midair, unsure of what she meant. She clarified, "Like maybe we're making something feel permanent because we're afraid to question it, because questioning it might break it." It wasn't an accusation, more like a confession. I thought about that, about how easy it was to fall into a rhythm and assume it meant forever, about how people mistake routine for certainty. But I also thought about the way she laughed when Olivia sent us voice notes from her summer camp. The way she leaned her head on my shoulder without asking. The way she reached for my hand when she thought no one was watching, even in a crowd. "I don't think we're pretending," I said after a long silence. "I think we're building. And building takes time. It looks boring when it's real." She smiled faintly at that, like I'd struck some quiet truth in her chest. We didn't talk about it more that night. But something shifted. We stopped trying to define what we were, and instead just kept laying bricks. We made Sunday mornings sacred. We planted basil in mismatched ceramic pots. We argued once about who was worse at folding fitted sheets and then made up by turning it into a competition we both knew neither of us wanted to win. When Olivia finally returned from her summer with Jason, everything came back to life again. She burst into the apartment like a whirlwind of stories and sunburned cheeks and crumpled craft projects. Sierra hugged her so tight I thought they might both cry themselves empty. Olivia, for all her energy and volume, had grown in ways that weren't just about height. She was more observant now, more sensitive to tone. She'd ask questions like, "Did you miss me too much?" Or, "Was Mom okay without me?" And Sierra would assure her with a voice full of honesty and softness, "I missed you in all the best ways." For me, it was like welcoming back a piece of our puzzle. The laughter got louder. The bedtime stories returned. The smell of Play-Doh and spilled juice filled the corners of the home again. But not everything was perfect. There were rough moments. Adjustments. Olivia had picked up some habits from her time with Jason that didn't sit well with Sierra. More independence, more sass, more demands. And there were evenings when Sierra would raise her voice, then instantly regret it, pulling Olivia into her lap with tearful apologies. I learned not to intervene unless asked. This was their dance, and I was there to support, not direct. But it reminded me that love wasn't a steady incline. It was a wave, full of crests and dips, momentum and stillness. Later that month, something unexpected happened. Sierra's old friend, more like a mentor, named Lena, invited her to co-host a prestigious business symposium in Chicago. It was a huge opportunity, something that could elevate her company and position her as a national voice in her field. But it also meant a week away. Sierra hesitated, torn between ambition and motherhood. "What if she needs me?" she asked, pacing the living room. "What if something happens?" I looked at her, calm and sure. "Then I'll be here. You go, Sierra. You've built this. You deserve to stand on that stage." And when she left, Olivia and I made a pact to turn the week into an adventure. We made pancakes every morning. We built a fort in the living room. We wrote Sierra little letters every night and took photos of our chaos to make her laugh. When she returned, she was glowing. Exhausted, yes, but radiant. The kind of glow that only comes from being fully alive. She ran to Olivia, scooped her up, and they both tumbled into the fort still standing in the living room. Then she looked at me and whispered, "You didn't just hold it down. You lifted us all." And in that moment, I knew she wasn't talking about the week. She was talking about everything, about the way we'd slowly, deliberately stitched a life together from the scraps of unexpected meetings, hard conversations, and honest love. And for the first time since that rainy night when I first gave her a ride to the airport, I felt it. This was home. And this time, none of us were going anywhere. By the time autumn rolled in with its rust-colored leaves and crisp winds that hinted at coming change, the rhythm of our lives had taken on a quieter confidence. Sierra's business had found its footing again after the chaos of the spring, and Olivia had settled comfortably back into her school routine, coming home every day with paint on her fingers, stories about science experiments gone wrong, and an ever-growing fascination with outer space. Our small apartment, once a quiet bachelor space I barely decorated, had slowly become a home layered with textures of a life I never knew I'd long for. Pink sneakers by the door, sticky notes with third-grade spelling on the fridge. The smell of cinnamon-scented candles Sierra insisted made the place feel like a hug. Everything about our day-to-day life had grown rooted in the kind of small, dependable love I used to think only existed in stories other people got to live. And yet, even as the comfort deepened, I sensed something shifting in Sierra. Something quiet and unspoken, tucked behind her soft smiles and late-night journaling. One evening, after Olivia had gone to bed and the dishes were drying in the rack, Sierra sat at the kitchen table staring at her laptop, not working but thinking. I leaned against the counter, sipping tea, waiting for her to speak. She finally looked up, a shadow flickering across her features. "They want me to consider expanding," she said quietly. "Opening a second office in D.C. next spring." I blinked, not surprised, but suddenly aware that we were once again standing at a cliff's edge, staring at a leap that could change everything. She continued, "It's not definite, just talks, but it would mean travel, meetings, maybe even moving, eventually." Her words trailed off, not as a threat, but as a confession. She was giving me the space to respond, to breathe, to feel whatever I needed to feel before she asked the real question hanging between us. Could our life survive that shift? I set my cup down, pulled up a chair, and sat across from her. "Is it what you want?" I asked, not accusingly, but curiously. She looked at me for a long moment, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of a placemat. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Part of me wants to say yes without hesitation. It's what I worked for. But the other part?" She exhaled slowly. "The other part is afraid I'll lose what I've finally found." And that was the moment it hit me. Even after all we'd been through, months of weaving our lives together, learning each other's flaws and rhythms, there was still fear. The fear that love, no matter how carefully nurtured, was something fragile. Something that might not survive the weight of big decisions or long-distance dreams. But instead of letting that fear fester, I reached across the table and took her hand. "We've made it this far because we've been honest," I said. "So let's keep doing that. If this expansion is what your heart is calling for, I'll be right here, cheering you on." Her eyes softened, but I saw the hesitation, still hiding there. "And if it means change, then we face it together. Not because we have to, but because we want to." She gave a small, almost relieved laugh. "You make it sound simple." I shrugged. "Love's complicated, but commitment, that part's clear." We didn't make any decisions that night, but we started having the conversations that mattered. We talked about what a move might look like, what it would mean for Olivia, what it would mean for us. And for once, neither of us ran from the uncertainty. Meanwhile, Olivia had her own news. One afternoon after school, she burst into the apartment and announced, "I'm going to be in the holiday pageant." Sierra smiled, genuinely thrilled, while I asked what part she'd be playing. "I'm the moon," she beamed, spinning in a circle. "I have one line, but it's important." And just like that, our world refocused again. On silver construction paper costumes and practicing her one dramatic line over dinner and on the subway, and even during bedtime stories. Life, for all its looming transitions, still revolved around these beautiful, fleeting moments. And I realized that this was the key. We couldn't put our happiness on pause waiting for clarity. We had to find it in the now, in the child dressed like the moon, in the woman quietly chasing something more while still choosing us every morning. November brought colder winds, and with it came clarity wrapped in quiet moments. One Saturday, while Olivia was at a sleepover, Sierra and I walked through the park, bundled in scarves and sharing a bag of roasted chestnuts. The conversation wandered from mundane things, holiday shopping, dinner plans, to the bigger questions. I want to try it, she said at one point, not looking at me but at a group of kids tossing leaves in the distance. The expansion. I want to see what I'm capable of. I didn't answer immediately, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to honor the weight of what she'd said. Finally, I nodded. Then let's figure out how to do it without losing what we've built. That night, we drafted ideas on napkins, joint custody arrangements, travel schedules, maybe even a move if things went well. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was a united one. And that mattered more than anything. Because what I saw in Sierra now wasn't just a woman I loved. It was a partner, a teammate. Someone who wasn't afraid to fight for her dreams, but who also knew that love didn't have to come last on the list. And what she saw in me wasn't just a man who once gave her a ride. It was someone who stuck around long enough to matter. The holidays arrived like they always did. Quiet at first, then all at once. City streets were strung with twinkling, lights that danced in shop windows, and the air had that undeniable hint of cinnamon and snow. I found myself taking deeper breaths during my walks, slower steps during my shifts, noticing the way people bundled in scarves smiled a little easier this time of year. But more than anything, I noticed how much had changed in such a short span. What had begun as a simple ride in the rain had become the cornerstone of something bigger than either of us could have predicted. It was Sierra who reminded me of that, in subtle ways. Handwritten grocery lists with my favorite snacks added, hugs that lasted a beat longer in the mornings, quiet looks that said everything she didn't have to speak, and Olivia, in her moon costume with glitter-streaked cheeks and endless questions about space and life and love, had become the kind of light that made everything warmer, even on the coldest nights. The week of the pageant came, and the entire household revolved around it. Sierra worked overtime to finish a deadline early just so she could take the day off, while I adjusted my driving schedule to pick up a few night shifts instead. Ruth offered to sew sequins onto Olivia's costume, and Maddie even offered to make a papier-mâché moon prop, though it mostly ended in glitter-glue chaos. But it was beautiful. This messy, love-filled makeshift version of family that had come together in ways none of us could have imagined a year earlier. The night of the performance, the auditorium was packed with proud parents, neighbors, and kids fidgeting in costume wings and halos and felt antlers. Sierra gripped my hand as the curtain rose. "This is her moment," she whispered. And when Olivia stepped into the spotlight, delivering her one line with the kind of drama only an 8-year-old can summon, the applause that erupted felt like more than just appreciation for a line well spoken. It felt like a celebration of everything we had become. After the show, in the chaos of camera flashes and sticky punch and crumpled programs, Olivia ran up and threw her arms around both of us. "Did I do good?" she asked, eyes wide. Sierra kissed the top of her head, laughing. "You lit up the whole sky." And for a moment, I just stood there, holding the two of them, realizing that nothing about this night, this life, felt borrowed anymore. It was ours, real, earned. Not a temporary detour, but a destination. The following morning, I found Sierra at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through her laptop. She looked up and smiled sleepily. "Guess what?" she said. "The DC office is officially greenlit. I got the contract this morning." I raised my brows, and before I could respond, she added, "I told them I'd start by commuting. I'm not uprooting our life for something I'm still figuring out." That sentence sat between us for a long, comfortable second. Not because it was heavy, but because it was honest. She was choosing growth without abandonment, ambition without sacrifice. I nodded slowly. "We'll make it work." And we meant it. Every part of this, our jobs, our daughter, our pasts, they had all become part of the same blueprint. We were no longer reacting to life. We were designing it. Around mid-January, I took Sierra and Olivia to a small diner on the corner of 5th and Holloway, a place I'd passed 100 times but never entered. The booths were cracked but clean, the jukebox still played songs from the 80s, and the waitress refilled your coffee without asking. Olivia ordered pancakes with whipped cream and extra syrup, and Sierra laughed at the sheer volume of sugar on her plate. We sat there for hours, the way only people truly comfortable with each other can, talking about everything and nothing at all. That night, after Olivia had fallen asleep in the back seat and Sierra rested her head against the window, I realized something that had been building in quiet, unspoken ways. I didn't just love Sierra. I needed her. Not like an addiction, not like a missing piece, but like someone who made the world make sense again. That thought lingered long after we pulled into the driveway. And by the time February rolled in, I'd begun making plans. Nothing grand or cinematic, no flash mobs or skywriters. Just me, a quiet promise, and a ring I'd saved for over the last 4 months. It wasn't about asking for something dramatic. It was about anchoring what we already knew to be true. I told myself I'd wait for the perfect moment. But life, as it always does, had its own timing. That Sunday, as we folded laundry and Olivia danced around the living room in her pajama cape pretending to be Captain Moonlight, Sierra looked up from a pile of mismatched socks and said, almost offhandedly, "You know, I used to think love was a phase, something that faded after the newness wore off." I looked at her, curious. "And now?" She paused, met my gaze, and smiled, softly. "Now I think love is the thing that stays when everything else changes." And maybe it wasn't the proposal I imagined, but it was the moment. I walked across the room, pulled the ring box from my hoodie pocket, and knelt down between a stack of towels and a stray mooncape. Sierra blinked, surprised, then laughed through a tear. "Seriously?" she asked. I grinned, dead serious. And with Olivia squealing in the background and glitter from the costume still stuck to the carpet, she said yes. The days that followed the proposal moved like a dream wrapped in everyday details. Nothing about life suddenly became easier. Bills still had to be paid. Olivia still left a trail of glitter and cookie crumbs in every room she passed through, and Sierra's work still had its fires to put out. But everything felt steadier. There was a quiet confidence in the way we moved through routines now, like we had stepped into the rhythm of something that had always been waiting for us. Our home, though modest, began to hold a new energy. The kitchen where we'd shared midnight cereal bowls became the spot where we discussed wedding plans over coffee. The hallway where Olivia taped her drawings turned into a growing gallery of family portraits, some crayons, some photo, all overflowing with joy. Ruth started crocheting decorative pillow covers for the newly engaged, and Maddie, though she tried to act unimpressed, had already started calling Sierra her almost sister-in-law to her friends at school. We didn't plan a grand wedding, just a small ceremony for spring. Something in the backyard, surrounded by friends and the family we'd chosen and built. Sierra wanted fairy lights and wildflowers. Olivia insisted on being the moon princess flower girl. And I just wanted to see her walking down the aisle, in that smile that first stopped me dead in my tracks the night she climbed into my cab. Every day that brought us closer to that moment also brought us deeper into the life we'd woven from chaos and chance. I still drove my shifts, though I took fewer late-night routes. Sierra adjusted her schedule so she could make school pickups at least twice a week. We juggled, adapted, stretched, but we never dropped each other. And even when the occasional argument flared about dishes or scheduling, or which side of the bed was technically hers, it never felt like a fracture. It felt like something worth solving, something worth working through because the foundation beneath it was solid. One evening, after dinner and dishes and Olivia's bedtime story, which had somehow turned into an epic 3-part saga about a dolphin queen and her pizza kingdom, Sierra and I sat on the couch, legs tangled under a shared blanket. She rested her head on my shoulder and let out a soft sigh. "You know what scares me sometimes?" she asked. I turned to her, brushing her hair back. "What?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That this is all too good to last." I let the silence stretch for a moment before answering. "That's the thing about good," I said. "It doesn't last if we just hope it will. But if we keep choosing it every day, it doesn't have to go anywhere." She didn't reply, but she didn't need to. The way her fingers tightened around mine said it all. We weren't perfect. We were human. But we were all in. The morning of our wedding was soft and slow, like the world itself had paused to honor it. The sky held that delicate shade of blue that only seems to appear after a week of rain, as if nature had waited for this moment to reveal its gentler side. Inside the house, the air buzzed with quiet energy. Maddie was helping Olivia into her lavender flower girl dress, half of her hair already clipped back with glittery pins. Ruth stood in the kitchen piping frosting onto cupcakes, humming some old tune that none of us knew but all of us found soothing. I paced the backyard, barefoot in the grass, pretending to check on the chairs and the lights strung up between trees. But mostly, I was just trying to slow down the beating of my heart. It wasn't nerves in the way I'd expected. It was something deeper, something heavier with meaning. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was the closing of a long, winding road that had started with a rainy ride to the airport and twisted into something neither of us could have predicted. Sierra was upstairs with her best friend Angela, who had flown in from Atlanta just to be there. They'd laughed so hard the night before that I heard them through the floorboards. I'd caught a glimpse of her dress earlier, simple, elegant, a soft ivory that caught the light in a way that made her glow. And I couldn't stop picturing her walking down the aisle we'd lined with thrifted lanterns and hand-picked daisies. There was no aisle runner, no live string quartet, no seating chart with calligraphy. There was just us, our people, and the stories we brought with us. Guests began arriving one by one. Some were neighbors we barely knew but had become part of our patchwork community. Others were co-workers, family friends, and the occasional client of Sierra's who had insisted on coming. There weren't more than 40 people in total, but it felt like the backyard was overflowing with warmth. When the time came, I stood at the makeshift altar, 2 old fence posts wrapped in white linen and eucalyptus branches, waiting as Olivia led the way, sprinkling petals that clung to the damp grass like tiny stars. Then the music shifted, and there she was, Sierra. Walking slowly, barefoot like me, her dress trailing behind her just enough to catch the breeze. Her eyes locked on mine with a kind of steadiness I hadn't known I was missing until the day I met her. As she reached me and slipped her hand into mine, the world narrowed to the space between us. The officiant, an old friend of Ruth's, began to speak, but I barely heard the words. All I could feel was Sierra's hand in mine, Olivia beaming, nearby, and the overwhelming sense that this exact moment, was the reason the universe had twisted our paths together in the first place. That night, after the laughter had quieted, the lanterns had dimmed, and the last of the guests had trickled out with hugs and promises to keep in touch, Sierra and I found ourselves alone on the porch, wrapped in a single blanket, 2 mugs of still warm cider cradled in our hands. The backyard that had only hours ago been alive with music, conversation, and the rustling of dresses and clinking of glasses was now hushed, glowing softly under the fading lights we hadn't yet bothered to take down. Olivia was fast asleep upstairs, her flower crown placed gently on the nightstand next to her bed, her face still pink from a full day of joy. Maddie had offered to sleep over in the guest room just in case we needed help cleaning in the morning, and Ruth had slipped off quietly, leaving behind a handwritten card with a pressed daisy inside. The words she wrote in that note, "This is the beginning of your real forever," sat heavy in my chest, not as a burden, but as an anchor. Because this, all of this, was ours now. The life that began in the front seat of a cab on a rainy afternoon had grown into something real, something lasting, something no storm could wash away. We talked in low voices, not wanting to disturb the stillness around us, but also because neither of us needed volume anymore to be heard. I asked her what she remembered most about that night, her frantic voice giving me the wrong street name, the way she'd looked out the window and then back at me as if seeing someone new for the first time, the odd quiet between us that felt less like awkwardness and more like possibility. She laughed, remembering how embarrassed she was waking up in a stranger's home with a little girl offering her toast and a woman she didn't know pouring her coffee like it was the most normal thing in the world. I told her how I almost didn't take the fare. I was tired, running on fumes, but something told me to pull over. Fate, she whispered. Serendipity. Or maybe just 2 people who were ready to be seen. We sat like that for a long time, her head on my shoulder, my fingers laced through hers, watching the sky bleed from deep blue to velvet black. stars slowly appearing above the treetops. And in that silence, I thought about the future. Not in the anxious way I used to, with questions about money and sacrifice and whether I was doing enough, but in a calm, certain way. I thought about mornings making pancakes for Olivia, helping Sierra juggle new clients, Maddie visiting from college with stories we couldn't believe, Ruth teaching Olivia how to garden. I thought about days that weren't perfect but were still good, still ours. And when Sierra finally turned to me, kissed the edge of my jaw and said softly, "You're home now," I didn't have to say a word, because she already knew. I'd never want to leave again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.